Hello there, and welcome along to what used to be the Wildflower Meadow, and before that, the Goose Run here at North Lodge. Now, I've been promising to bring you this piece of media for a very, very long time indeed, and I'm sorry my schedule keeps getting ahead of me, and I never seem to catch at the time. However, something large is happening in the garden with a huge influx of roses coming through for review for 2026, meaning all of the roses I reviewed for 2025 have got to leave the trial beds in the trial garden and go somewhere. Hence, this area really needs me to start thinking about doing something with it. And many of you have asked me to tour you through the process that I would go through as a garden designer and as an ex-commercial landscaper as I approach a project and how I'm going to lay things out. Now, this is quite challenging for me to do because having done this for a very, very long time, about 35 years in total I've been working as a commercial gardener. This is something that comes incredibly naturally to me. It is not something that I put down on paper. I'm not tied to a drawing process. One, because I can't draw and I'm terrible at scales, but I absolutely sort of live and breathe plants. And I know that sounds really strange to see, but I get to walk into a space and really envisage how something is going to feel. So I'm going to talk you through some basic points to help you design a space and mark a few things out. So first of all, I tend to, when I enter a space, whether it's somebody else's garden or my own, I tend to walk into a space and just allow it to sit with me for a moment or two. How does the space make me feel? What are the plus points and what are the negative points? What things do you want to draw attention to and what things do you want to try and cover up and try and hide? Now, if I stand to one side, you'll see that there's a large, long path along here. This was laid in the 1970s, and it goes to something that North Lodge needs to use quite regularly. It goes to our septic tanks, where obviously our wastewater and other substances from the cottage actually go, and then they have to be pumped out on a regular basis. So this path needs to be maintained, and it's quite ugly. It's made of 1970s sort of local authority, really thick, heavy duty slabs on a really solid concrete base. So I'm not going to be taking this up anytime soon. At the very end of the path, you can see I've abandoned two little bits of stonework there. That's actually the base to a concrete and stone bench, which I inherited from my mum and dad, and they inherited from my dad's father, which I want to incorporate up into this space. At the very end of this space, there's one fence panel that comes along this way. That's at the northern end of our plot. This actual area faces due south. The sun rising on my left, coming up and over the area and setting just on my right-hand side in the west. This area gets absolutely baked by the sun all day long. It is hot, it is dry, and it's a bit difficult to explain, but we're actually on rising ground here. When the housing estate was built behind North Lodge in the very early 90s, about 17 houses was built there. A lot of soil was dragged around North Lodge, creating what I often call the donut border, which runs around the cottage. Our entire property to our east side is kept up by a 3-meter high retaining wall, which is about 2.5 feet thick. So we're actually up quite high, and then there's an 8-foot fence on top of that. The entire area, this peninsula behind me, is actually on rising ground. There are banks that run down to the roads on either side, meaning this area really does drain freely as well. So I need to make sure I pay very close attention to improving the soil here, making sure there's lots of organic matter going into the soil, and of course my irrigation system, which is going to be laid out in several different stages. So at the very end of this path, there is a little patio at the moment, which is basically simply some slabs laid on the floor, which I want to keep. Going to lift those and lay those properly, because the boat pond that used to be behind the extension, which has been replaced by the water tank, is at the very end of its life as a water holding entity. I want to drain that, and I want to stand there upright in this area facing towards the house. There's somewhere to sit. I'm going to build a bench in there with it actually facing towards the cottage, giving us a little bit of privacy from the road beyond and giving us a focal point at the very end of this path. I want to then place the beautiful stone and concrete bench that I inherited from my dad and he inherited from his father on that little patio. At the moment it's down on the spring lawn, where it's to be honest with you, it got put there because it had nowhere else to go, and I wanted to replace that with a sundial, which I also gained from someone who got it out of a skip and then gave it to me. It's been moved since the extension was done on the house some 5 years ago, and hasn't really found anywhere else in the garden to go. So the little patio will contain the boat pond, which will be stood upright and facing towards the house, and the little stone table and the bench that goes with it will be there as a focal point. I want to keep, I'm standing to one side, I want to keep our old Bramley apple tree there. It used to be, when we first moved in, a beautiful feature of the garden, but was on its last legs when we moved in, and unfortunately died about 3 years ago. And I've knuckled it back to leave the structure there. I have a rambling rose going through that. I also have an old apple tree just off to the left, which many people that know the cottage particularly well have very, very fond memories of. They used to come apple picking here and knock on the door. Several people have told me this story. They used to knock on the door of the previous owners and ask if they could take these apples for scrumpy. Now this apple tree is again on its last legs. It's very, very old indeed, but it still produces really beautiful, bright red, almost sort of Disney Snow White type apples. They are the most vivid red. They are very, very tasty. It produces very few of them, but I'd like to keep that. And I have Bathsheba from David Austin Roses planted at the foot of that as well. So I want to keep that there. The fences along the back of the area are fairly sparse, so I have some incorporating to do with some climbing roses which I'm struggling to place in the garden. But wanting to make a feature of this path, what I'm going to do is, in a second I'm going to show you some marking out that I do. I would like to add a series of upright pillars. Now at the moment, with finances as they are, I can't afford to produce a pergola here. I'd love to be able to build a pergola, but I simply do not have the money to do that at the moment. So I'm going to start with the upright posts and add the tops at a later date. And it's really, really okay to do this kind of thing if you don't have the money to do everything all at once. None of us have unlimited resources. We have to do these things in stages and steps. The posts alone up here are going to cost us probably around £300, which is going to be quite a lot of money for us at the moment, but it has to be found. I have about a dozen climbing and rambling roses which need to find homes for, and I think this area I can place around 6 to 8 pairs, or 4 pairs or 6 pairs of posts along the path, giving me around 8, hopefully, posts in total to be able to grow roses up and eventually produce a pergola on the top when I can afford to do so. I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see it ever so quickly, because this is a little bit strange. The area just here to the left-hand side of the summer house. Now, I'm a terrible thrifter. I like to pick things up and I like to gain things. This summer house was actually taken from a customer's garden. They paid me to take it away and take it to the dump. That was 8 years ago, and it still stood here at the moment. It contains a dirty little secret. I'm not going to open the door because it's absolutely packed full of stuff. In the summer house is absolutely full, and I mean full to the brim, of cardboard. It's not going to make any sense unless I show you, so let me show you. Can you see that lot? The entire summer house is absolutely packed full of cardboard. I've been saving it for around a year to a year and a half, knowing full well that I'm going to have to do something with this area. Now, being the wildflower meadow, what you normally do is you allow your wildflowers to self-seed. So this is going to be absolutely swamped and riddled with wildflower seed, which used to be something I really wanted, but I'm going to have to find a way of smothering. So I've been keeping cardboard for this area for a long, long time. So one of the things that will be done in this particular area is it will be covered in, first of all, covered in mulch as a soil condition, because it's had no soil work done to it for a very, very long time. Wildflowers tend to like really rough and poor soil, so I didn't incorporate any media whatsoever when the wildflower meadow was laid. What I want to do is I want to cover the entire area in the 2 tons of soil condition I have on the drive at the moment. That will be shoveled and spread out onto the area once I've marked it out. I will then cover that in cardboard and plant through it. Then on top of that, I will lay a wood chip mulch to keep everything down, and underneath all of that will be my watering system as well. So that will offer the irrigation system. The reason why I wanted to quickly talk about the goose shed, this summer house used to be used for our goose shed. So a customer paid me to take it away and replace it. They had a new shed built, which we supplied, and this one came home with me. It's done me 8 years, coming on 9 years. So it's done very, very well for something that was heading off to the skip. Next to this, what used to be the goose house and house our geese overnight, used to be a bath. It was removed from the cottage about 8 years ago as we replaced the bathroom, and I used to use it as a goose bath. I used to fill it up with water, and my geese used to bath in it and wash themselves in it. That bath, unfortunately, was underneath a great big Choicea tonata, which was right over in this corner. Again, something I inherited when I moved to this house. And it's been used by an awful lot of wildlife over the last 8 years as somewhere that they can reliably get water. Now, we have several water sources of water in the garden, which are really, really important for encouraging wildlife into the garden, especially birds and mammals, especially, most importantly, during periods of elongated dry weather when it's very, very hot and very, very cold. And it's important this water moves so it doesn't freeze over. A lot of people will say to me, Ben, how do you get so many birds in the garden? It is literally because we maintain these water sources at all times. They have water pumps on them moving the water continuously, meaning they don't freeze over, and birds and mammals can rely on those water sources to be available 365 days a year. This little source of water has become quite important to local wildlife, and I've noticed underneath the concrete fence there, if you can see, if I point towards it, there's a great big hole in underneath the fence, and the badger and the hedgehogs have been coming underneath the fence to use the water sources, giving me a little bit of an idea. I always like to add to the garden as far as wildlife is concerned, never take away. So I'm going to be building a wildlife pond in this area. This is something that I promised Mark I would do a long, long time ago. And he wanted a beautiful pond next to the patio outside the extension that we had done 5 years ago. And it unfortunately evolved into something else for me. The boat pond was removed, and I then put in that huge Stark water tank, which I absolutely adore, with that lovely monolith stone in the center. It's filled with koi, but it doesn't have a huge amount of benefit for other wildlife. The birds use it an awful lot. They sit on top of the stone and drink, and they bathe on top of the stone, and there's a constant supply of birds coming through the garden all day, every day. However, wildlife, as in mammals, can only use the bubble pool, which is just in front of me now. So I want to incorporate a wildlife pond here. Now, some time ago, I ordered this when I had a few extra pennies. This is a pond liner, which I ordered out of Amazon. So I will mark out a second in a moment the pond that will be here, and that will be a focal point with a sort of very, very low bed and some boggy areas so things can walk in and out of it, and the planting can then encapsulate it. The other thing I'd like to obviously keep is what we call very, very nicely the Grand Pavilion. It's not very grand at all. It is a permanent wooden gazebo, which we installed up into this area about 7 or 8 years ago, before we opened the garden for the very, very first time. Again, I've got several uprights here around underneath the pergola, or the pavilion, which aren't being used. I've got the Generous Gardener on one end, there's one side. I've got Strawberry Hill from David Austin on the other, and I've got 2 uprights at the back, which again offer me somewhere else to put some climbing and rambling roses. Now, there used to be some turf underneath here, which I'm now thinking about gravelling. Realistically, the light levels underneath there never get particularly good, and it never gets any direct water because obviously it's got a roof on it. So I'm going to cover that area in gravel. So that's another thing that I need to do. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark out the posts along the path to give myself my uprights and work out how many of those I can get in there. And then I have another idea as well. And once again, this is a little bit untidy. I'm sorry, I'm going to pick you up and move you again. If you can see over the cottage, this is North Lodge behind me. If I stand to one side, you will see our enormous weeping willow tree. That stands obviously on the very, very southern side of the house in the middle of the lawn there. It's a constant battle to maintain this particular tree. Now, when I was working as a commercial landscaper, that wasn't an issue. I have all of the tools. I had a 3.5 ton wagon. I could pile all the waste in there. I could take it away for commercial recycling, because it basically created about 4 tons of waste every time it was done. You can't really see the scale of it. It's absolutely massive. I had at one point put a row of willow hurdles along the pathway here to keep the wildflower meadow from flopping over the path. And what I also want to do is, so that was a really great way of adding decaying matter to the garden. Another way of adding somewhere for ladybirds, earwigs, lacewings, wasps, bumblebees, for them to actually create habitat. Now, obviously, I'm going to try and fix 2 problems with one thing here. The weeping willow needs to be pruned again this year. It's done every other year to keep it in bounds with our home insurance and our buildings insurance, because it's too large to be as close to the house as it is. To make sure this tree survives and we have access to it, I have to pollard it every single year. And what I want to do with that is I want to create some very, very naturally shaped hurdles around this space. I have it in my head that I want them to undulate and I want them to change size and shapes, very much like a snake. I had envisaged maybe piling soil up into banks and undulating areas here, but one, I don't have the soil, and secondly, it's a huge amount of work. The willow would be much easier and give me the same sort of effect. So these willow hurdles I'm going to weave, they're probably going to be around 18 inches high at the highest point and go down to nothing, and they're going to snake their way through this area almost like sort of seaside groins, giving me somewhere natural to get rid of all of that waste from the willow tree, which is slowly going to decompose over a period of years, and give wildlife somewhere to go and give me some nice breaks and some undulating texture here. So that's the plan for this particular area. Once I've done the bare bones, and those bones obviously involve the pond, the uprights, and then the willow weaving that I want to do, it will then give me a little bit of an idea to go around the area with. Bear with a second, I'll be back in a second. To go around the garden with this. Now, you can use anything you like. This is a spray marker paint. This is really used for marking out commercial areas for sort of building sites and groundworks, but I find this really, really useful if you need to get anything down onto a open canvas and you're not very good at drawing to scale, which I'm not. I simply do not enjoy it, and I'm not very good at it at all. I know people say practice makes perfect, but I've been doing this for a long time and it doesn't really appeal to me whatsoever. But what I will do is I will mark out the areas in the garden with this. Basically, you spray it on the ground and it gives you a way of working it out naturally. The other thing you can also use, put that down, is things like this. These are metal sight pins, again found on building sites. You can buy these from builders merchants. Are a really good way of three-dimensionally marking things out. I'm going to drive these into the ground with a hammer along this path to give me an idea of the spacings. I can then use my spray, or I could use flower pots, or I could use, I don't know, what else could I use? I could use heaps of soil, or I could use terracotta pots dotted about to give me an idea of the spacing of the roses that are going to go up in here. Most of the plants that are going up in here will be roses. There's no doubt about it. There are about 40 roses I've got to find homes for. Obviously, some are climbing and rambling, which are going to go on uprights, and others are shrub and bush roses, which I want to put in here. There is also a huge amount of peonies, probably around 20 peonies. So this garden is probably going to be called the Peony Walk. It's an idea that's come into my head, and it gives me a way of visualizing the space. So once I've driven in my uprights, I've marked out the pond, I've maybe marked out the shuttering around the grand pavilion and the patio, and then I've drawn on the floor my actual snake work that I want to turn into hurdles. I can then go around with my marker paint and simply dot out my roses. Now, most of the roses that I'm going to be growing are going to be of a standard size, normally reaching between 3 and 5 feet in diameter, which means they need to be planted at around 5 to 6 feet intervals. So I can basically go around with my marker paint and dot on the floor, and it gives me an idea of where things are going to go. I don't ever really like to think about colours. I will simply grab the plant out of the pot and put it in the ground. I will then, once the bare bones are in, i.e. the roses and the shrubs, I will then have an idea of how much herbaceous perennials I can fit around it, and they will fill in what I call the negative space in the garden. The roses will make up the positive space. Those are the show, those are the things I want to draw attention to, those are the bare bones, and the negative space will be filled with things like herbaceous perennials, the peonies, the phlox, the hellebores, all of that kind of thing. So that's the process I'm going to go through. I'm going to go, I say, mark out the path, dot those around. I think we're going to be going about every metre to 1.2 metres in distance. That's about 4 to 5 feet in distance between my uprights. I'm going to put them around 40 to 50 centimetres away from the edge of the path, meaning two things. One, it gives the space a little bit more width. When I walk through here, I'm not going to be catching my shoulders or whatever I might be carrying on the posts or the roses, which are obviously laced with thorns. And it also gets the roses' roots away from the concrete standing that is actually laid underneath this path. Then I'm going to mark out the pond, the shuttering and the patio, and then those snakes. And I will check back in with you in a couple of weeks' time when I've actually got on with some work. I say, what I want to do once I've marked out the area, now the leaves are down, what I've done is I've waited for the leaves to be down because I didn't want to have to collect all these up and these to get in the way. So the leaves are now down. I can now basically cover the entire area in soil conditioner about 3 inches deep. This will give the soil a a good amount of organic matter and a good condition. I can then mark out the area as I discussed with you before I then lay my cardboard. On top of that, I will be laying my wheat irrigation hose before planting through that, and then covering the entire thing with chipped bark to mean it's all sealed in. I shouldn't have to do any weeding up here during next year, and it all should be ready to go. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of the explanation. I say my process is very organic, it lurches from here and there, but I say go into a space, how does it make you feel? Look at the plus points, for instance, the grand pavilion and the path, check your orientation, do a bit of a soil test to see what kind of what work the soil needs. Normally you can normally guarantee it's going to need a lot of mulch, it's going to need an awful lot of improving, and then mark out your bare bones, the other things like the hurdles that I'm going to be building, and of course, your permanent structure, your roses and your shrubs, and then work out your negative space to work out how many other things you can go through. If you have any questions on the process, to say for me it's quite organic, I can't explain it in any way better for you. As I say, I don't draw, but if you have any questions regarding the topic, don't hesitate to leave me a comment below. I will see you all again very soon. Take good care now. Bye-bye.